See why she was making fun of it.
My favorite.
So you wanted me to make fun of her for doing something that you completely understand why she was making fun of it.
She's like, oh, this is bad, and then she put it all into red font, which I need to revise it.
You didn't do what I told you to do.
I think I put in the sentence.
You didn't write a SPA. You wrote a apps.
I forgot.
He went argument first. He went argument, purpose, strategies.
Yeah, but isn't SPA supposed to be backwards?
No, you decide what they are backwards, but you write it.
Why would you decide it backwards if you're going to write it forwards again?
It makes more sense.
No, you brainstorm it backwards. You have to come up with your argument first before you come up with the rhetorical devices.
I like it, Clint. I like it.
I mean, you got a to-be verb right there. This speaker, who is a crusader.
Oh, you're right.
Crusader socialism.
Yeah.
Spreads this belief inside the novel through the use of symbolism, details, and communal dictation. Not diction.
Not the same thing.
So when you open the book, it like reads to you. Because he's dictating. You hear the voice of Steinbeck every time you...
Why did I throw my entire paper?
Communal diction.
Yes.
You put dictation on everything?
What was your hug?
Communal dictation.
It was a quote from
NPR.
Oh, I hear him right now.
It was a quote
Very
from NPR.
unhappy.
That's what it was. You just put in brackets NPR.
Yeah, I know what to quote.
No, it's like
I also put a star
lot
by
of
that.
voices though. Hey, it's like what is NPR? So it's like
The website.
National Public Radio. That was his citation, his incorrect
it's
citation.
communal dictation. It's like a lot of people talk at once essay.
It's a rough draft for a reason.
It's good. Rough.
Whatever the first part of the works cited page is,
Right.
that's what your citation is.
Oh, okay.
So
You can definitely cite.
people don't put, yeah, you can cite the website, but you don't like put it in the web address. So if a website has like a title, or excuse me, if a website has an author, then that author's last name would be just like Steinbeck.
Yeah.
Some websites don't have an author, so you have a title, so you put a title in.
There is an author for the article, so I should have.
So it would be, yeah, it would end up being that author's last name. There's no page number because
Sam's
it's...
had a rough time with this draft.
I thought Steinbeck would have told you that when he was dictating the novel to you. That did not happen.
How'd you mess that up?
All right, so on page number 6, you have prompt number 2. This isn't like a good. There we go. Good technology there. In a carefully argued essay, analyze at least 3 rhetorical devices. Diction, spelled D-I-C-T-I-O-N. Imagery, details, figurative language, and syntax, to name a few. Steinbeck utilizes to critique a specific aspect of American culture. So the things that should be, I don't know if a relief is necessarily, the word that you'd be going with, but there would be some familiarity and that you're still doing this. So we're still looking at diction, imagery, details, figurative language, and syntax. You would still be having specific types of figurative language. You'd be identifying an adjective going in front of your diction and all that kind of stuff. The part that is certainly going to be different is the argument is a little bit different than what you were doing before. Rather than attitude about effects of the Dust Bowl, you're looking at a way in which Steinbeck specifically critiques an aspect of American culture. So there's a lot of similarity, there's a lot of familiarity, you're still doing the same book and all that kind of stuff, but the nuance of that is a little bit more difficult. Number 2 is not meant to be more difficult than number 1. Some people like number 1 more, some people like number 2 better. But I wouldn't say the way that this is written means that it should be specifically more difficult. And you wouldn't really have to approach it much differently than how you're doing the first one. Any questions, concerns, things with the way that it is worded?
So I actually included some of this into my other essay.
And I don't think you would be the only person by any means.
So am I allowed to just take what I put in the other one and put it into this one? I just have to reword it a little bit. That way it's not the exact same.
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by can I take some of what I did in the other
So
one.
like for metaphors, like if I was like, to say Steinbeck was critiquing capitalism, my metaphors were basically all about that. So if I wanted to do metaphors again, can I use the same examples?
You can, and I figured this was going to be a question that was going to pop up. You can absolutely reuse rhetorical devices.
Okay.
Okay, so If you had a metaphor before, you had a symbol before, you had communal diction or dictation or whatever before, you can reuse those. I would not try to reuse all of them because you still want them to have some different aspects to it. Now, me saying you can reuse devices is different than saying you can reuse examples. You know, because you could you could use metaphors again, but I don't really want you to use all of the same examples that you had from before.
Use, like, one example?
So what I'll let you do, and where you if you decide to do this at all, and where you would use them is up to you within the paper. You had to have 9 specific examples. That's going to change. The setup of the rough draft, you know, the point value, the 3 examples per paragraph, at least 2 quotations, take 4 from expository, 5 from narrative, vice versa. All that stuff is exactly the same. So the ante's not being raised so far as what the content has to be. Of your 9 specific examples, from your first essay, I'll let you take 2.
Okay.
So you did extended metaphor, you know, let's say with the bank, you know, monster thing we were talking about from chapter 5. If you wanted to reuse that example within your second one, you'd be able to do that. What you certainly could not do would be, you know, you reuse that whole paragraph. You're going to go with 3 examples. And I don't mean this in the sense of Anna or anyone else are going to be looking for shortcuts and things like that. You're going to submit your essays to turnitin.com. It is possible to plagiarize yourself. So, you know, you submit your 2 essays, and your second essay is, I'm making up random numbers, coming up as 45% plagiarized, because basically you took that paragraph and you copied and pasted in the second one and changed a word here or there. You are plagiarizing yourself. So if you wanted to reuse an example, I have no problem with that. But the explanation, the argument, those kind of specifics are going to change somewhat. Before you submit your final, and again, this isn't scary by any means, before you submit your final essays, I'll have you fill out it's called a Statement of Academic Integrity. Sounds very formal, just because it is. Where basically you sign off on, I confirm that I did not copy from myself, I didn't copy and paste from anyone else. These are the people that worked with me. Sam peer edited, Ben looked at my paper and laughed. Zach actually offered some helpful, support and things like that. So you'll be signing off on that stuff before you submit it. But of your 9 examples, your specific things, you can reuse 2. They can both be in the same paragraph. You can have one in your first paragraph, one in your final paragraph. That'd be up to you. Okay. But yeah, I was expecting that to kind of be a question for sure. So there could be some overlap. What's the argument for this one?
That
you
he's
just did.
critiquing capitalism.
Well, no, for the one that you just gave to me.
Oh, that he had a negative attitude towards the effects of the gospel.
Okay. So yeah, you could go with a critique of capitalism with it, and yeah, there'll be some similarity because it's the same author, it's the same book, the same tone and all those kinds of things. But I would say the nuances of the argument will still change a little bit. What else? What did you find to be most difficult while you were doing your first draft?
Find quotes that would go along with your rhetorical advice.
So having examples, like you have examples, but figuring out what device that example would be.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit both.
Okay.
Both that and it's a big book, so it's hard to find examples.
And it is a big book.
Yeah.
One thing now is you're going through it again. So part of it with the second prompt is that you have at least a little more familiarity where some things are.
Yeah.
There could be some things that you were looking for with your first prompt that you're like, I don't know if this is necessarily going to fit in with what I want to do. For this one, you might be able to kind of, incorporate them a little bit more. So one nice thing is you are a little bit more familiar with the book than not because you hadn't read it before, but maybe we're locating where things are, some ideas to kind of keep an eye out for. I think we're a little bit more ready for. what could be potential critiques of American culture that Steinbeck are going for? I mean, we're saying being critical of capitalism in general would be one. So, Steinbeck critiques. What else? Just to give us options.
The greed of the people and the government.
If I write greed of American government, I am kind of restricting myself that I can only write about government. If I go of greed of American people or greed of American culture, that would let me take a look at government itself. That would also let me take a look at people throughout the whole entire book. So when you find out that the price of pork and things is cheaper in town than it is at the farm, but you can't get to town, that would certainly still be a way in which you'd be able to take a look at greed.
Would it be like repetitive to say, a specific aspect of American culture that Steinbeck criticizes is the greed of American culture?
Yeah, it would be. Now thesis statement. Let's think about this.
Right.
How's it go?
Spa.
Good. So that means we start with what?
Yes, which would be, I just don't want to mess it up.
Well, and it doesn't matter what S's we end up picking,
Yeah.
which strategy. So let's say imagery, metaphor, and illusion. I don't need to mention the author. I don't have to call him a crusader of socialism or anything like that, or a socialist crusader, because you've already established that in my introduction. So I could go imagery, metaphor, and illusion. I need a verb. What do they do about the greed of American culture? Criticized? To your point, yes, it would be redundant if I said Steinbeck criticizes American culture through imagery, metaphor, and illusion, where he highlights the greed within American culture. That's going to sound like a pretty awkward sentence. What I'm doing here is I'm just going, okay, these are my devices, so these are my strategies that I have, going imagery, metaphor, and illusion. I have that one-word verb, that purpose like we were coming up with yesterday, and then what is it that the argument is? That the American culture is too greedy. So while the prompt says, criticize some aspect of American culture, that doesn't mean that phrasing, that wording is going to have its way kind of coming into it. Going back to Katie's example, if she is strictly looking at government, then we can specify it down to American culture, and that's okay. The big thing, really, that you just want to make sure that you are specifying is what is that aspect of American culture that you're looking at. It would be too general to go imagery, metaphor, and illusion criticize the American culture.
Yeah.
What aspect are we looking at? Greed, violence, apathy, callousness, all those kinds of things. That would be specific enough. So there could be a lot of similarity or parallelism with your thesis statement, Kate's thesis statement, and Zach's, because they all very well could have American culture in it. I don't have to. With capitalism, you don't have to say American culture is in it, but it would be something that you certainly could be able to do. So you could almost kind of think of that as a template, and then what is it that you would want to put, in this spot right here. So other things that, I simply just mentioned, the apathy, callousness, the lack of caring. Why don't Californians like Okies?
Because they steal and rob and take jobs.
Okay, at least that's what their viewpoint of it would be. Ben, did you they're Okies. Yeah, just got 'em.
They they're impoverished and that they talk different, like they compare them to like gorillas and like.
Okay. So basically, they don't like them because they are not Californians. So what aspect of our culture is kind of being criticized? Yeah, you could simply go, and I think we normally think of that as, with the fear of foreigners international and whatnot. But yeah, you could, criticizes the xenophobic of American culture, where if you're not from the same place as everyone else, there's going to be issues, there's going to be problems. Katie, was your hand up or? No? Okay. Any other options? Is this one more difficult? Why?
I don't know. It's just like, it's hard to explain, but this one is going to be a challenge.
I feel like this one, like once you find your, once you find like rhetorical devices and what like examples you're gonna give, it's gonna be easier. But I think coming up what you're gonna write about he's critiquing is gonna be more difficult.
I think if we were coming up with a negative term, I think you would say this one is a little more vague than what prompt number 1 was. If you are coming up with a neutral or maybe positive, it's a little bit more open-ended, where you have a little more freedom, a little more choice. The problem with that is, as you said, you got to kind of come up with what you want it to be. I mean, you knew before you were looking at an effective the decibel. When it comes to Steinbeck criticizing a certain aspect of American culture, a lot of that criticism can be indirect at times, so it's not that, and this is the chapter where I will not criticize the xenophobic traits of the people in California. This is now the anti-capitalism, chapter or segment of the book. So coming up, it's I don't want to say reading between the lines, but there's a little bit more interpretation that would be taking place with this one than where the other one was a little bit more cut and dry. So I think you end up having more ownership of the essay. That would be a positive term, but this is mine, this is my ownership, because I'm kind of dictating it, no pun intended, a little bit more than what was happening before. But I have to come up with what that angle is going to be. So that part can be a little bit more difficult. Yes, I would agree with that part. As we're moving forward, and we'll certainly kind of talk about AP examples and stuff like that. On an AP exam, when you do a rhetorical analysis, you're not going to be analyzing the grapes of wrath. They're not going to go, okay, remember Heart of Darkness, go back to the boat on the Thames River that Anna loves so much after 3 paragraphs, and then do rhetorical analysis of it. They're going to give you a passage, and you'll have to analyze it. Sometimes they'll give you an argument, analyze the devices utilized that the author does to critique, criticize, argue that, and I'll tell you what it is. Sometimes it'll be analyze the devices used in the author's argument, and you got to figure out what that argument is. So this is kind of more of that one where there's some interpretation decision kind of being made on your part that wasn't quite as much on the other. But so far as what has to go in, what ultimately needs to get included, it's going to be the same thing as what you were doing certainly before with it. So whereas I think last time it was making sure, do I understand what these things all mean? Shouldn't have to really worry about that quite as much with this one. It's more of what argument can I prove and simply go with it. When we talked about SPA and moving backwards, it's not that you're going to write it backwards, but again, you would want to start with, okay, what argument, what viewpoint, what critique can I definitely support and prove? Pull the examples. As you look at those examples, then you decide, okay, are these examples of imagery, are these examples of diction, details, figurative language, syntax? So the way that you write it is still going to go strategy, purpose, argument, because that's going to make it much more direct, much more clear. But as you are thinking of what's going to go into that sentence, start with the argument first. If you go, I need to find examples of imagery, I need to find examples of diction, I need to find examples of metaphor, you could have some that deal with capitalism, some that deal with greed, some that deal with apathy, some that are dealing with police violence, some that are dealing with xenophobia, some that are dealing with, families falling apart. You could go with being critical of the fact that Connie is leaving, Noah's left, and stuff of that nature. But then you're not going to have an argument that kind of holds everything together. So it's figure out argument first, then which examples were better. But when you write it, you're still going to go strategy, purpose, argument.
Yeah.
What else? Is there anything else?
I have a question about the book.
Okay.
So like, I don't know, you have all this, you keep telling us all these like things that have like deeper meaning in the book that we didn't know about. Is there a deeper meaning for that guy that Tom and Casey find, that he just like lives on all the lands of where were they?
You mean when they originally go back home?
Yeah, and they're eating bunny with that guy.
Eating bunny. I like that.
Yeah.
Not rabbit. Muley.
Yeah. What kind of meat is that?
What?
Rose of Sharon.
It's a
That's what they say.
yeah, it's a plant. The way it gets like Rosa Sharon. It's not a, I'm not going to say common, but it's not a uncommon Southern name for that era.
Why don't they just call her Rose or Sharon?
Because that's not the
They have two names there, just one.
it's like calling someone Violet, someone Daisy,
But you don't say like
someone Fern.
I was having my grandma read me Grapes of Wrath, and she was saying that.
She was dictating it to you.
Yeah.
No,
There was a no one does not know how to read. There's a Rose of Sharon in my family a long time ago.
There you go.
I mean, it's not like an ugly name. It's just confusing as to why they like. I've never heard the word of in someone's name. I've never heard that before. Huh?
Jesus of Nazareth. That's like
That's like
Jesus.
forever ago.
Who is that?
Anyways.
They did a mock draft one year during the NFL draft where you could draft anyone who ever lived for your football team. Number 1 overall pick,
Is Jesus?
offensive lineman, University of Pennsylvania, Benjamin Franklin.
Really?
First pick.
I think they really
Build a nation around him, you can build a football team around him. Second pick was a outside linebacker from Mongolian state, Genghis Khan.
oh, I would have picked him.
Attila the Hun went number 3, middle linebacker.
It's so violent.
Wait, I thought it's still the 100 games.
7th pick was a quarterback from a little-known college in Nazareth. Sees the field well, pulls miracles.
And you have like Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun.
Well, no, those are separate teams. Like
Oh, I
so,
was just like,
team
what
number
stat?
7 took the quarterback. There was not an 8th
No,
pick.
you read that.
They stopped after the 7th pick.
That is insane.
Stopped at the
Yes, Sam. To your question, of course there is.
Does Graves have something to do with it?
And Muley.
I don't know if Muley have to do with it, but
It's a mule. Like a donkey.
Which is?
Donkeys die in Heart of Darkness. You'll
I'm guessing Graves has something to do with that. He lives in the graves of the families.
Well, he's basically a what?
A great.
Because there's no one there anymore. It's just him. He doesn't live in his home or like in his old traditional home. He lives in. He lives like in the cave, and as people come, he disappears. You kind of know he's there, but no one ever really kind of sees him and catches him. He's more of like a ghostly apparition, kind of character. Where's his family?
Moved
They
to
left.
California.
They left. Why'd they leave? Because everyone else left. Why'd he stay?
He was too scared to leave.
Not too scared.
Oh.
He's too stubborn.
Oh, stubborn like a mule.
Okay, well now they should just like that's like the most. It's ridiculous. I mean, his name's like Donkey goes. Like, literally. It's like the most in-your-face thing ever.
Oh well.
Can you call him Donkey?
But here's and yesterday, as parents and folks were coming and whatnot, when you talk about AP literature or English in like 10 minutes, you can't really do it. I said, for some of you, I will ruin literature forever, where you're reading for enjoyment. Sorry, Anna, gone. Not going to happen anymore. Or as you start to see something like that, the wheels kind of begin to turn, and you see how it would all kind of fit together. The nice thing with the Grapes of Wrath is it is such a lengthy book that you're able to kind of incorporate this stuff without having to be like in your face the whole time. This Muley's only there really for that chapter. If your whole book, your whole story, your whole text was based upon Muley Graves, then yeah, basically you're reading about donkey ghosts. And it gets to be a little too much in your face with it. But these kind of subtle things, as you read, as you go through characters and whatnot, you'll kind of start to pick up on that stuff. It will happen.
Why did Steinbeck choose to not bring Connie back?
Because he left.
You mean like why have him leave in the first place, or
Yeah,
why?
Casey also left, but Casey came back.
Well, but
I understand that could be like a. Yeah, I said like that could be like a.
Casey becomes kind of more, and obviously with him being like ex-preacher, he quote unquote like finds the spirit. So he is more of a spiritual. I hate saying guide or writing guide because he doesn't necessarily want to be, hey, follow me, I'll lead you to the promised land. He's kind of given up on that thing. But he still kind of looks out for the collective good. I think that would be an appropriate thing to say. And going back to his kind of JC initials, what does he end up doing?
Returning.
He comes back,
And dies for us.
and he ultimately is willing to kind of sacrifice himself for the betterment of other people. So in some ways, he kind of has to, from that character standpoint. Connie's younger. Connie thinks that this isn't going to work. He's more kind of worried about himself. And you take a look at criticism of younger culture, whether it's 1930s or 2018. My age bracket looks at you and goes, "What a bunch of self-pretentious, know-it-alls who think they can solve their own problems. You want to go out on your own and do it? Fine, go ahead and do it." Also, though, don't forget that a lot of times when you have characters like this, and you certainly talked about this with Julius Caesar, when you have so many characters, it's also relationships that you can kind of look at with the characters. I think Connie ends up being a foil for a lot of folks of the other characters, just like how you had with Brutus and Cassius. Rosa Sharon's a brat.
Yeah.
And Ma basically tries to, snap her out of it. It doesn't matter that you're pregnant. You still got to pull your own weight. You still have to be able to do this. You still have to do all that. What is Rosa Sharon able to do by the very end of the book? Ben doesn't have to give us like the graphic detail of it, but she does give back where it's a complete selfless act, where you would not expect her, after reading about her in the first, 11, 12, 13 chapters of the book, you wouldn't see that happen. What does Rosa Sharon do? Well, she completely kind of goes from that I to that we mentality.
Yeah.
So one of the criticisms that you could do of American culture, Katie said, you said greed. This would be different because when you say greed, I think we normally think of like big corporation and stuff like that. Criticize the self-centered nature of American culture. You could look at people such as Connie.
Yeah.
What could be a rhetorical device that would highlight the selfish nature of some? Well, if you have selfless characters, you could look at them as being foils. You could look at, what do you call it, when you have two things in close proximity that contrast one another? Might have used this term when you were going over A Tale of Two Cities last year. They juxtaposed one another. So juxtaposition can be a very nice rhetorical device. Juxtaposition is a good one also when you have a expository and narrative chapters, you know, in such close proximity to one another, where the ideas that get kind of presented in those can juxtapose one another. It's perfectly fine if you still write dictionary details for this essay, but, you know, the whole character symbolism thing, the juxtaposition and the use of foil characters, as you read more and more and more, as you write more and more and more, they start to kind of become a little bit more second nature with it. So the devices might still be very similar to what you did in the first one, but again, if there were a time to try something different, a rough draft is a good time to do it. You could, in theory, have a whole paragraph, not on Muley, but you could have a whole paragraph on name symbolism, you know, or if you wanted to, or character symbolism. You could do Casey, you know, with a Christ comparison. You could do Muley with the stubbornness and whatnot. You would just have to make sure that all those things fit in together into that one argument that you're looking at. You could have great name symbolism, but if it doesn't match up with the argument that you're trying to get across, you really didn't accomplish anything.
Does an author ever just like pick a name because they like it? Because it's
Oh, I'm sure they do. And you know, like the comment, which, you know, to your credit, you haven't asked yet. Some of you have probably been thinking of at some point, did the author really mean to do that? More often than not, I would say those tend to be unconscious decisions. If you're really good at something, you naturally do it. I don't think a NFL running back, as he gets the ball, goes, okay, I'm going to cut to the left, and then I'm going to go to the right, and then I'll do a spin move. He reacts to it. I think an author, you have certain tools at your disposal. If you're an author, you know how to use them, and when it's appropriate, you